Every now and then, a special Magic the Gathering card comes along. A card that you forge a connection with through years of memories, reminds you of why you love the game. I've been in it for almost 30 years now, so I have a lot of these cards, from Hypnotic Spectre, Balduvian Horde, Yawgmoth's Bargain to Spiritmonger, Mistbind Click to Deathrite Shaman. And yet, at least for an old-timer like me, those connections become fewer and fewer as time goes by, and the release schedule ratchets up at an exponential rate. We don't seem to have as much time to appreciate cards anymore, to create and tell those stories that bind us to them so strongly. But even now, as unattached to new cards as we are, there are still times that a card breaks through the noise and the fog and speaks to you as a Magic player. I was excited for Dominaria United. Although the set came out over a year and a half ago, I can still remember feeling like this was one of the sets I'd been waiting my whole Magic playing life for. And that turned out to be true, but not in the way I thought. I've been waiting to see new versions of the characters and places I had grown up loving, and there were plenty of those to see, but the card that called out to me the most, and even in some ways changed my life, was a brand new legendary creature we had never met before. In the story, we first meet Elas il-Kor when she attacks the Planeswalker Liliana. And even though Lily has taken on some of the most powerful beings in Magic and lived, this mysterious young core woman brings Liliana to the brink of her abilities. This is certainly very cool, but it wasn't what made me fall for her. One of the cards I've gathered the most stories with in the last decade and a half has been Blood Artist. When I saw we were getting one for Standard, I knew this would be the beginning of a whole new book worth of stories to tell. The problem is that the arena, while fun, doesn't produce the same kind of connections or grand stories that paper Magic can, and I have very little luck finding paper Standard games in my area these days. I wanted to leave the digital space, to actually hold the card in my hands, to share our victories and defeats together with other real people. So I knew what I had to do. I, a Standard player for 30 years, had to build a real Commander deck. It was daunting, but with my new friend at my side, and the promise of a lifetime of new stories to tell, I decided to build a paper deck for a format I had been putting off for years. Let's see if I know what I'm doing.
And I'm your favorite Magic channel's favorite Magic channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
What up, Wizards? It's Dev, and yeah, I'm from the place. What of it? Anyway, we got a paper EDH deck to show off today, and as a Standard player, how good am I at that? So EDH players, I actually come humbly before you today, asking that you judge me. Is my deck tournament worthy? But listen to me, right? We talk about EDH tournament stuff. Is that really a thing? Yes. At Galaxycon Richmond. That's right, March 15th through the 17th at Galaxycon Richmond, there's going to be a CEDH tournament, actually multiple CEDH tournaments. One of them is like a 1K tournament. You win the thing, you win a bunch of money, but the other one, you win the whole thing, you get a full set of revised dual lands for playing some EDH. For the Standard players, they got a little 10K event. That's pretty good. The winner's guaranteed 5,000 actual American dollars they just put in your hand at the end of the thing. That's pretty good. So if you want to play some Standard at Galaxycon Richmond, you can do the same thing. You want to play some Modern? That's worth even more money. 15K Modern event. Winner's guaranteed $7,500. There's also tournaments for about half of the other formats that you can think of. I was going to say about all of them, but there's no like pre-modern tournaments at the event that I can think of. No 98, 99 tournaments. It doesn't matter. There's lots of other tournaments at this event for all the popular formats. There's also a bunch of drafts going on. There's like 25 total tournaments, this stinking thing. So check out Galaxycon Richmond, March 15th through the 17th, if you're in the Richmond, Virginia area. Even if you're not, maybe take a little drive, make a trip. And thanks to Misty Mountain Gaming, who is getting together with Galaxycon folks to sponsor all of those Magic tournaments, right? So thank them. They're really doing a lot to actually get people to play Standard or just paper Magic in general. That means a lot to me, especially considering I'm starting to dip my toes back into not only paper Magic, but Commander in general. So let's go ahead and get to it. Since that's what we're here to talk about today, sorry, I got to pay some bills. Plus, I actually kind of like the sponsor, to be honest with you. They seem like decent folk, and they're actually a Magic person. Usually I get sponsorships for like gaming chairs and stuff, and I'm like, I don't want you. But these people actually like play Magic. I've talked to them. They play Magic, so I wanted to shout them out. But anyway, let's actually talk about this paper deck. All right, that is more than enough intro. Let's go ahead and get started with the main event here, starting with the woman of the hour herself, Elas il-Kor, 2 mana for a 2/2 Death Touch, part Soul Warden, part Blood Artist, both cards I've got a lot of good memories with. So how do you build with this? In Commander, well, there are Aristocrats builds, there are Reanimator builds, there are Life Gain builds. We're going to take a little bit of all three, but the most present element of those three in this deck is definitely the Aristocrats. So we're going to start with all of the stuff that gives us dies triggers in this deck. So obviously there's Elas il-Kor, but there's also obviously Blood Artist. One of the whole reasons I wanted to build the deck in the first place is because I love this card so much and have so many incredible stories to tell with it. So anytime I get a chance to play it, I will. Same is true for Zulaport Cutthroat, which is kind of just a Blood Artist. We're trying to play as many Blood Artists in this deck as we possibly can, and it means sometimes that we play weird cards, but not in the case of Vein Ripper. This is brand new from MKM, one of the newer cards in the deck, but you'd be surprised how many MKM cards are in this thing. It gave us a lot of tools for Aristocrats. The last few sets have, as a matter of fact. So this deck becomes representative of all of Magic history as a result, and I really like that about it, but Vein Ripper is especially powerful for obvious reasons. Basically double Blood Artist triggers whenever anything dies is really powerful. But there's also Cruel Celebrant, another sort of Blood Artist, sort of Zulaport Cutthroat at just 2 mana. There's Bastion of Remembrance, my favorite exclusive preview card of all time. And a couple of years ago for Christmas, this was one of my Christmas presents from Brittany. She got me a foil Bastion of Remembrance. Thank you very much. I have a wonderful wife. Vron Executioner Thane is also in here, another relatively newish card from the last couple of years, but you also get double Blood Artist triggers on this, but only once per turn. Thing is, though, that's once per turn, and then your opponent's turn, and your other opponent's turn, so you can get like 4 triggers off of this in a turn cycle. That turns out to be an awful lot of work. There's also Falcon Wrath Noble, it's literally a Blood Artist, but it costs a little bit more to cast. Importantly, only has the 2 power, and you'll see why that's important on a couple of cards a little bit later. It shouldn't take too long. There's also a Meathook Massacre in here, one of the most, if not the most, expensive card in like the entire deck. It's because I just kind of had one, and I figured if we wanted Blood Artist triggers, this would go in, and also obviously helps us sweep the board some of the time. There's Sir Conrad, great death triggers on this thing, and the thing doesn't even have to die. It just goes to the graveyard from anywhere, and you get incremental damage, which this deck is really, really big on, even if it's not strictly death triggers. But this is one of the better death triggers in the deck, and it's worth paying 5 mana for. Pitiless Plunderer is the in for now, not for too long, of the incremental damage, but this card definitely needs to be in the deck. Extra mana generation in the form of tokens whenever a guy dies is unbelievable, and it's going to give you the mana to be able to double, triple, quadruple spell some turns when you really need to. Aside from that, there's Corpse Knight, back to the incremental damage. This is not a Blood Artist, but it is a lot of damage represented in one card, especially if we can get our token makers going. We've also got Wisp Drinker Vampire, also brand new from MKM, but you might not be as familiar with this as you are Vein Drinker. This is, or Vein Ripper, that's right. This is 4 mana for a 2/4 flyer, and whenever a creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, you get a drain. It also has a 7 mana activated ability, but it's kind of like a Vault of the Archangel activated ability, right? All your dudes with power 2 or less gain Death Touch lifelink till end of turn. So you get life gain triggers off of that. Your dudes become really difficult to block with the Death Touch, and I just really like the idea of breaking through with this in the late game. But honestly, just the incremental damage I'm really into, because most of the creatures in our deck have power 2 or less, as you've already seen, and I've asked you to remember. So aside from that, we've got Blind Obedience, which is one of the cards that I feel like is soft in this deck. If I was going to take stuff out, and I'm going to have to very shortly, more on that in a second, I feel like Blind Obedience might be one of the first things that I take out. It's not quite interaction, but it is one of the few elements we have that cares what our opponent is doing, and I do like that about it, but mostly I like the Extort. Again, we've got life gain trigger stuff going on in this deck, so we care about it there, but it's also incremental damage. Extort's one of my favorite keyword abilities, or just mechanics of all time, and I wanted it represented somewhere in the deck, and I think this is one of the stronger ways of doing it. Aside from that, though, there's Midnight Reaper onto more death triggers. This is going to draw us cards, and we need that. I don't feel like we have quite enough stuff in the deck that draws us cards, and Midnight Reaper is the best way of doing that, at least raw way of doing that. In terms of not necessarily raw ways of doing that, we've got Homicide Investigator, yet another brand new card from MKM, or at least as I record this, it's relatively new. This is just going to give us 1 clue per turn. That's 4 per turn cycle, and that turns out to be an awful lot. And we can use the clues for more than drawing cards in this deck if we want to. There's multiple things to sack the clues to, so remember that. We've also got Skull Clamp, premier card draw in this deck. Just clamp it to something, kill that thing. Two cards, clamp it to something else of 1 toughness, kill that thing, 2 cards. The whole time you're getting dies triggers. You feel really good. Skull Clamp needs to be in any Aristocrats build, as far as I'm concerned. Transmogrant's Crown is like a worse version of Skullclamp, but it's still an artifact, which kind of matters for this build. We'll talk about why when we get to a specific card. But aside from that, it's also just going to represent, a few drawn cards in a game for a very low mana investment. I'm always into that. There's also Tesa, Opulent Oligarch. I was just telling someone on stream the other night, I'm not sure about this card in Commander, but I still want to try it out, especially considering I reread it since then. It turns out you can get like 3 clues per turn from this, if you were able to get like 1 Blood Artist trigger and all your opponents lost life. So 3 clues at the end of your turn is very, very good. At least it sounds very, very good. And obviously you bust those clues, you get dudes to sacrifice. You're feeling really good about that. So I do think this version of Tesa goes in the deck. But I put it that way because the other version of Tesa is also pretty obviously in this deck. I like this deck because you get to play Tesas. You get to play, not only is it an Orzhov deck, it is an Orzhov deck, baby. Like, it's unapologetically, everything about Orzhov is in this deck. And I'm a big fan of that, including Tesas. Getting more dies triggers is always something that we really want in this deck, pretty obviously, based on every card I've shown you so far. But we'll move into sack outlets now. Obviously, got all these death triggers. We got to kill stuff, right? The best way to do that is to sack it to stuff like Carrion Feeder, just a single mana for a free and repeatable sacrifice outlet. Carrion Feeder is going to get bigger over the course of the game. We really don't care. We just want 1 mana for a repeatable sack outlet, like Carrion Feeder or Viscera Seer. Scries can sometimes be even more important than making a creature big. We got to fix our draws in this deck, and fixing these draws goes pretty well with all of our clues and with Midnight Reaper and stuff too. So really sweet card here, but mostly, again, cheap, repeatable, free sack outlet is the name of the game. It's also Ashnod's Altar in here. Should be in here. Love this card. I just got a $50 gift certificate for Christmas from Brittany. And by the way, I have an amazing wife. All my good Magic cards come from Brittany, but I spent part of that $50 on an Antiquities Ashnod's Altar, and this is what the seller sent me. Yep, still mad at them for that. Yep, still haven't resolved it in any way. I'm just going to be mad at them and never order from them again. But either way, you got to have Ashnod's Altar. I didn't already have one, so I kept it. It's in the deck. You got to play it. Aside from that, there's Bartolomeo Presidio. This is 2 mana for a repeatable sack outlet. Not as good as 1 mana. It's double the cost of 1 mana, but this allows us to sacrifice all of our clues and stuff to make it bigger, which is really, really important some of the time. There's also Dimir Houseguard. I don't see this seeing a ton of play in the Elas il-Kor decks when I look at Elas il-Kor on EDH rec, but I think you need to reevaluate. This goes and gets Tesa and a couple of other important cards in the deck, like one that we'll get to in a minute when we get to the Reanimation suite. But as far as Dimir Houseguard goes, this not only transmutes, but it's also a free, repeatable sack outlet that stays on the board through a lot of board wipes and stuff. Just a really, really good card that, again, I'm surprised more people aren't on. Aside from that, there's Ailey Eternal Pilgrim. Meets at the crossroads of a bunch of different things we're doing. It's a sack outlet. It gains life. Both of those things are really good, right? It's a legendary creature that will be important for the same reason that artifacts are important. I know that sounds weird, but we'll get to it. You'll know it when you see it. But we want to play a bunch of legendaries. We want to gain life. We want to sack stuff. Ailey does all those things. She's really good. And sometimes she even blows stuff off the board. As far as repeatable sack outlets, we're running low on them now, but Vampiric Rites is an important one. We want to draw cards, and even though this is an expensive sack outlet, we will often draw a few cards off of it before we start resorting to free sack outlets. Aside from that, there's Priest of Forgotten Gods. We can sack 1 thing a turn to this, but at really, really good value, right? Being able to get mana and draw the card, always going to be some use for that. Priest is amazing and deals damage to everybody too. Just awesome card. Braids, Arisen Nightmare, a shiny one too. I mostly put this in because I had it. But this is something else that allows us to sack 1 thing per turn, and will sometimes end up drawing us a bunch of cards, even if it only triggers once. So really sweet in a deck like this. Aside from that, there's Diabolic Intent. I had just asked Twitter how you feel about some of these cuts that I'm making. And one of those cuts was Demonic Tutor, and Twitter just did not understand that. Now, I mostly cut Demonic Tutor for power level reasons. I wanted to bring the power level down in my deck, and I also felt like Demonic Tutor wasn't the most synergy-driven card in the world, right? So we fixed that with Diabolic Intent, which is a very similar card, but does provide synergy. So you could say I did it for power level reasons, but I, in some ways, introduced a more powerful card in this deck. But anyway, there's also Blade Crafter, which makes everybody sack a thing. That's pretty good in a deck like this. There's also Village Rites, 1 mana, draw 2, sack a guy. Incredible card. Why not play it? Eaten Alive, along with the next card, Bone Shards, are both cards that allow us to, for very, very cheap, sack creatures and blow stuff up. But in the case of Eaten Alive, we can just pay more mana for the card if that's what we want to do, but we'll almost always be sacking creatures to both of these. Gutter Bones starts us on the sack fodder train. Those are all of our outlets. let's look at all the stuff we hope to sacrifice. Gutterbones is a great example of a cheap creature that can come back to the board multiple times in the same turn and get these sort of loops going. But there's plenty of skeletons in the deck that do that, like Cult Conscript, which is going to come back to our hand pretty easily when anything besides Gutterbones dies, right? Or, for that matter, reassembling Skeleton, but Skeleton doesn't need anything special to have happened that turn in order to come back from your graveyard to your hand, so, or really to the battlefield in this case. So really sweet card. This needs to be in most Aristocrats decks, at least to my mind. I don't see it in every one, and that surprises me. It's also Market Gnome. A lot of people use these slots for their smaller guys in Aristocrats to use, Hunted Witness, Crawling Chorus, Doom Traveler, stuff like that. I am instead using a lot of my one-drop slots to play like Gutterbones and Cult Conscripts and things that can come back, right? Instead of giving you a body right when they die. I'm using my sort of Doom Traveler slot for Market Gnome, though. We need to gain life. We need to play artifacts. Again, we're getting there. Don't worry. Why we need to do that, but this does both of those and also draws us cards while it's at it. It's excellent sack fodder, good blocker, just a wonderful card that I'm happy to have in the deck. We've also got Bitter Blossom as we get to some sort of enchantments and other stuff that make creatures every turn. Bitter Blossom is probably the best one of all time for doing this, and although I don't have a Skrelv's Hive just yet, I'd like to. This is still a great stand-in, and honestly, if I had a Skrelv's Hive, I would just play both anyway. But there's also Breeding Pit, a card that I've loved forever, and also kind of takes the place of a card like Hive in the deck, right? Just devoting a couple of mana to this every turn gets you one creature for sacrificing, and that is really, really good in a deck like this. But if you thought that was spicy, I've got an even spicier enchantment to put creatures into play, and it's one that I'm really surprised I don't see more often, but that might just be because people don't know that it exists. And I'm also especially proud that it is from Ellis's home plane. She is Kor. That means she's from Wrath. So let's look at a card from Tempest. Pegasus Refuge. 4 mana for an enchantment. Pay 2, choose and discard a card to get a 1/1 Pegasus with flying. You get a little token guy. That's really good. That just is good. 4 mana is a bit of an investment, but it's not that much, especially in Commander. And 2 mana sounds like a lot, but it also isn't actually that much. If you draw dead for the turn, suddenly you have a Pegasus. If you draw a bunch off of Midnight Reaper, or you sack 3 clues and draw 3 cards, then obviously it's pretty easy now to turn one of those, or 2 or 3 even, into some Pegasi. Get to flying in if that's what you want to do, but most importantly, this gives you more sacrifice fodder. So again, maybe it's just because people aren't aware the card exists, or maybe people have tried it and decided it's just not that good. But still, I really like Pegasus Refuge. It has helped me out in the few games I played with the deck. So really cool card. Give it a shot if you didn't know it was around. But aside from that, we'll get into the life gain stuff now. Starting with Case of the Uneaten Feast, which kind of ports over into the reanimation stuff too. The solved state on this is incredible for when you want to get a bunch of creatures into play, or sacrifice a bunch of creatures and then just play them. Happens an awful lot in this deck, but obviously this is more life gain. It's like in a Johnny's Welcome before it's solved, and that's really, really good. There's also Lunarch Veteran. I'm not playing Soul Warden. I don't know who Soul Warden is. We're not playing Soul Warden. We're not playing Soul's Attendant, anything like that, but I am going to devote a slot to Veteran, especially considering we can flip it over, and once it's flipped over, it triggers and gains its life whenever creatures die, and that's something that's going to happen an awful lot in this deck. Aside from that, there's Amalia Benavides Aguirre. We're not playing too many Johnny's Pride Mate effects in this deck. This is the only one, so don't expect to see Bloodthirsty Aerialist or stuff like that. Alinda's Hierophant. I do want to play that card, though, but in any case, we are playing Amalia, though. If we're going to play any of these, it should probably be her. And in Commander, it's a little bit more likely, at least theoretically, that she actually goes off and blows everything up. And when that does happen, not only have you done that, you've cast a Wrath and left a giant creature on the board, but also you get a bunch of death triggers, theoretically, right? So sweet card for the deck. There's also Marauding Blight Priest, a pretty soft card in the deck that I'm not sure needs to be here, but it does double up all of our drains from Blood Artists, Zulaport Cutthroats, Falcon Wrath Noble, Vein Rippers, stuff like that, and ends up doing a lot more damage in the long run. So another Sanguine Bond. This, on a similar tip as Marauding Blight Priest, is just going to do a lot of extra incremental damage over the course of the game, and it's going to be a kind of problem permanent type to deal with. This does feel like a soft-ish slot. A lot of the life gain stuff does. We might just want to lean more into Reanimation and Aristocrats tricks, but I like having this extra dimension to the deck, and most of the cards that we're playing in the life gain suite help out the Aristocrat suite anyway, so we've kept Sanguine Bond end up to now. Into the reanimation stuff, we've got Phyrexian Reclamation, my favorite sort of reanimator thing in the entire deck. Just a single mana, and yeah, it costs some life, it costs some other mana to actually put something back into your hand, but you don't mind doing that. Like 90% of the time, this is going to keep your important pieces on the table. The deck really needs stuff like that. But we've also got Victimize to help us do that, and sacrifice a creature at the same time, which is something this deck also wants to do. And it's going to be able to find plenty of, 2 different creatures to put back into play, whether it's Bartolome plus Somalia, or Bartolome plus Blood Artist, or Blood Artist and Zulaport Cutthroat. There's plenty of things you can put back into play with this. You'll almost always have 2 things in your yard, right? Speaking of which, there's Oversold Cemetery. Not only will you usually have 2 things, you'll usually have 4 things. So this is going to get something important back every single turn. And that's really, really important, again, for keeping your pieces in place in this like very synergy-driven deck. There's also Unearth. This gets back most of the creatures in the deck and basically all of the important ones, save for Vein Ripper and Wisp Drinker. But I'm not even sure how important Wisp Drinker actually is. But when you do lose your Zulaport Cutthroat or your Blood Artist, this is there to save the day. Along with Anime Dead, which is also just a good-looking Magic card. Isn't it? Isn't Anime Dead a gorgeous card? Look at that color palette. Look at that contrast. Anson Maddox, you knew what you were doing, but this is also just a really good card that can hit any graveyard, but is mostly going to hit ours. It's relatively cheap to cast. We don't mind necessarily the power reduction on it. It might even help, depending on what we've got in play, right? But, mostly this is going to just keep stuff on the table for us, which is what we want. Another Reanimator card, this is one that we've been waiting for the whole video. It's Teshar, Ancestor's Apostle. Now, whenever we cast a historic spell, we can return a creature card with mana value 3 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield. Now, there are 20 different cards in the deck that trigger this, and also our commander. This is just decent in commander when you have a lot of creatures you want to target with it, obviously, because your commander is historic, right? So at least there's that, and our commander is relatively cheap to cast too. But aside from that, there's a bunch of artifacts in the deck. We've already been over a few of them. There's a bunch of legendaries in the deck. We've already been over a few of them, right? So there's plenty of things to trigger this card. And again, keep these pieces that we need in place. I asked Twitter if I should be playing this card, and half of you were like, oh my God, slam this card in the deck immediately. So that's what I did. I did that for you, and I thought it was a good idea. Aside from that, though, there's also the Cauldron of Eternity, one of our last reanimation pieces, but one of our most important. There's usually going to be 3, 4, 5 creatures in our yard. It's going to be relatively cheap to play this. We don't mind paying the life to do so once we actually activate it. And again, a dude every single turn. It's going to be really, really hard to keep our important stuff off the table. Again, I'm surprised more people aren't playing this in this deck. It's not like it's obscure, right? But moving into the removal stuff, we've got Despark to take out large permanents, Path to Exile, and Swords to Plowshares in here. And I like my 1 mana instant speed kill stuff. A Stroke of Midnight to take out any permanent type that we want to, except for lands. Swiftfoot Boots to protect our Ellis and other important pieces. Dark Ritual, again, gorgeous. God, Revised was just a beautiful set. It really was. But Dark Ritual, just one of the best Magic cards of all time. And we're playing Swamps, so we should play Dark Ritual. That's my opinion. Tutor goes and gets a bunch of important stuff in this deck. We don't have all of the artifacts and enchantments, right? But we have just enough important ones to want to play Enlightened Tutor. We've also got Ravenous Chupacabra sent to me by Die for Metal, a patron, in a batch of cards sent to me by patrons that they all signed, which is very cute. And I still got all of them, and I've still got all the notes she sent me along with them, and I still cry whenever I read them. I have made an impact on the world. I matter. Thank you for these cards, by the way, and thank you, Die for Metal, for the Chupacabra, which not everyone is playing in their Ellis deck. But I like bodies that I can sacrifice, and I like playing removal, and I don't want to have to devote slots to both of those things. So let's just do it all in one card. Aside from that, there is Meekstone, probably the spiciest card we've seen so far, and definitely one you don't see in like any Elas il-Kor decks on EDH rec, but I think you need to start doing it if you're not doing it. Like 90+% of the creatures in this deck are 2 power or less, and we don't really attack that much anyway. So even if we do have like a 5 power guy out, we're not going to tap him down 90% of the time. It's not a big deal. So this just keeps the heat off of us. A lot of people are going to try to steamroll us before we can get all of our pieces in place that we need, and this helps that to not happen. It's also an artifact that triggers Teshar because it's historic, right? But mostly this is heat deterrent, and it's really, really good at doing that. If you have not played Meekstone in one of these decks, please give it a shot. It's also, as I said about all these revised cards, gorgeous. Just 3rd edition was a beautiful set. But aside from that, we'll get into the mana rocks here, like Arcane Signet. We've actually got a lot of rings in the deck because there's also Orzhov Signet. There's Mind Stone in here. I just never leave home without it in my commander decks when I do build them. There's Soul Ring, again, just a gorgeous Beautiful set. Third edition was, God, look at that card. But anyway, getting into the lands here, there's Marsh Flats. There's only one normal fetch like this in the entire deck. There's multiple other fetch lands though, like Obscura Storefront, which also gains a slice. That could be important. Fable Passage to go and get whatever we want. Scrubland in here, 2 fetch 4 with a couple of these like Marsh Flats, right? But this is a proxy. There are only 2 proxies in this entire deck. They're both in the mana base. I feel like if you're going to proxy whatever you want, but especially into your mana base. There's no reason you should pay $200 for a Scrubland. Let's just proxy it. Aside from that, there's Temple of Silence. Really want the retro frame to look better, but it's a good card. There's also a Orzhov Basilica. Really want the retro frame to look better, but it's a good card. There's Godless Shrine in here because, you know, we're an Orzhov deck. Orzhov Guildgate. Now, there's a retro frame that looks good, and it's all shiny. It's a nice card. City of Brass is the other proxy in this deck. There's Command Tower, which is basically City of Brass that doesn't hurt us. Yeah, that's pretty good. I also wish the retro frame looked better on this, but I am a sucker for a yellow land text box. A land with a yellow text box, I will support every single time. Aside from that, there's Plaza of Heroes. Not only our commander, but plenty of legends to protect with this in the deck. High Market can help us sacrifice creatures and also gives us life gain triggers. We got to play that card. There's Spawning Pool, a creature that can be sacrificed, but also a decent blocker some of the time. There's Memorial to Folly, helps us get creatures back from our yard. There's Witch's Cottage, helps us get creatures back from our yard. There's Mortuary Mire. This helps us get creatures back from our graveyard. You see how there's a theme going here, but moving into the white lands, there's not a whole lot of those. But the one that is here is really important. Keldoran Outpost, one of my favorite cards of all time, by the way. This was a card that I chased from Alliances for like a year before I finally got a copy of it, and I was very, very happy. So when I ordered this copy a couple of years back for like $6, I was very surprised I could get it for that cheap, and very happy to get my hands on it again. A lot of people are playing like Castle Ardenvale in this slot, and that is a very good and relatively cheap card, but I'm playing Keldoran Outpost because it's not too hard to get a plains in this deck with all our fetch lands and our kind of high number of planes in the first place. And so when you do get an outpost out, it's going to cost you that planes, but in return, it's going to be really cheap to activate for the rest of the game. And it's just going to look boss sitting there on the table. Like, yeah, I'm a chase rare from Alliances. What? But anyway, aside from that, there's basic lands. You know, this is my favorite basic land of all time. This Swamp from Mirage, if you don't know me, is my favorite basic land art that has ever existed. But I only have one in my entire possession nowadays, which is really sad. So the rest is filled out with Urza's Saga Swamps, which I also very much like. But aside from that, there are plains. We've got Ice Age plains. I really, really, really like Ice Age plains. They're all gorgeous. More Ice Age plains. Aren't they beautiful? Another Ice Age plain with the little river with the stones on it. Isn't it a beautiful magic card? Aside from that, there's Mirage plains. Not just the stormy one with the bird, but also the sunny one with the ox. Another one of my favorite plains ever. There's an Urza's Saga plains just for variety. And then finally, a plains from Dominaria United. I want to call it Ellis's home plane, but again, her home plane is actually Wrath. That said, this is the one with the rainbow and the, I believe the Predator. It's not the Weatherlight. I believe that's the Predator crash landed on it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but either way, really, really love this plains. It's one of my favorite basic lands in the last like 5 years, so I made some room for it. Now, you might think that we're done here, but there's actually a ton of cards that are on the way for this deck. I am always tinkering, always upgrading this thing, and I was hoping I'd get some of these cards in before this video started, but just so you know, there's stuff like Hidden Stockpile and Feast of the Victorious Dead on the way. These both look like awesome cards for the deck, especially Stockpile. I want more stuff that gives me creatures every turn. Lurrus of the Dream Den is another reanimative element that'll be really, really good in this deck with all of our 2-mana guys. Rite of Oblivion is maybe the best removal spell you could possibly play in this. It is on the way. I promise. I know that I need this card. I'm amazed that I don't already have a copy. Flesh Taker is on its way too. I'm not sure I end up playing it, but it's more life gain triggers and a sack outlet. Vault of the Archangel is coming in here for a little redundancy with Wisp Drinker Vampire, and it's just a better card than Wisp Drinker Vampire. There's also Vindictive Vampire. Vinny Vamp's coming out pretty soon in my mailbox, hopefully, as well as Field of Souls, another card from Tempest that I feel like people don't remember or have never seen before, and it's actually really good for a deck like this where you're sacking dudes, you're getting tokens, you're sacking the tokens, you're having fun. There's also Dusk Dawn, which is coming to my mailbox pretty soon here, I hope at least, and I like this because it's going to kill a bunch of not our guys, but also on the other half help us get our guys back. We need cards like that in this deck. But aside from that, there's a bunch of important cards I'm not playing that I would like to play and are not currently on their way from TCG Player, right? Stuff like Ascend from Avernus and Rally the Ancestors. Speaking of getting your guys back, like we were just doing with Dusk Dawn, these are great at that, especially Ascend from Avernus. I'd really like to get my hands on a copy of this, and it's only $1, so it'll probably be one of the next things that I order. But anyway, that's why I'm trying to play Dusk Dawn in this deck. We need something to get all of our guys back and then probably just sacrifice them again in in-games that way. And these are both really good at that. There's also cards like Dreadhorde Invasion and Skrelv's Hive. I've already mentioned Skrelv's Hive, but we need cards that get us more creatures and sack fodder and stuff. And these are two of the best. Aside from that, I've already mentioned Alinda's Hierophant, but there's Alinda herself, right? We're sacking dudes. Alinda's getting huge. Both of these will break off into sort of hanger back walker impressions and just like burst into a million little guys when they die, and that's really sweet. We gotta probably work one of these in, if not both. There's Pawn of Ulamog. Speaking of, again, more dudes. We sack dudes. We get dudes. Cards like that are always good in a deck like this. Plumb the Forbidden and Deadly Dispute could go in here, obviously, if you want to draw more cards, and we do want to draw more cards. So not only cards like that, but stuff like Grim Haruspex and Morbid Opportunist to go with the Midnight Reaper. Those are obvious choices if we need to draw more. And then stuff like Oketra's and Bantu's Monument. One is more dudes, and then the other one is more incremental damage. Both of those things I like. But finally, let's talk about some expensive cards for this deck that I'm probably not going to be ordering anytime soon, but I acknowledge that if you actually do want to win a lot more games with this deck, you could slot some of these in. Let's say you want to go up to that tournament at the old Galaxycon Richmond, in that EDH tournament, win with some Elas il-Kor. You probably need to try some Bolas's Citadel, some Ink Shield. There's a few other cards, but these are my two favorite, potential expensive includes. Bolas's Citadel is an amazing card advantage engine that really helps a deck like this and will even sometimes 10 all of your opponents fairly easily, but really you just want the card advantage. Aside from that, though, Ink Shield, it's kind of a fog effect that's also going to put a ton of sacrifice fodder into play. You can swing with them if you want to. Inklings are good creatures, but you're probably going to get, 5, 6, 7, 10, 12, Inklings off of this thing, and that is a lot of sack fodder. Aside from that, though, there's altars. We've already got Ashnods, but there's also Altar of Dementia, Phyrexian Altar, great sack outlets, and we need to play more artifacts in the deck for Teshar, so these are definitely worth noting. Aside from that, there's stuff like Charismatic Conqueror, Ophiomancer, Black Market Connections. All of these can put extra creatures into play for us at the cost of almost nothing, Like Ophiomancer is going to put 4 snakes into play per turn cycle if we do it right. And that's pretty good. This is actually the cheapest card on screen. It's only like $6 for an Ophiomancer, and I think it's worth the money, but Black Market Connections probably looks like it's worth it too, and it's the most expensive card on the screen if I'm not mistaken. I could be. Conqueror is very expensive too. They're both like $15-20 right now, but for good reason. Conqueror is going to put a bunch of dudes on the table or disrupt your opponents, and it's in a similar way to like a Blind Obedience. And then Black Market Connections draws you extra cards if you need them, puts dudes on the table if you need it, just a lot off of connects in this deck. So if you have the extra $15-20, it's worth ordering the copies. Aside from that, though, I also am not playing the Veto and Exquisite Blood combo, but you probably should if you want to win more games. I just, A, didn't want to be that guy, B, didn't have like $25 to put this combo together, and C, didn't want to be that guy. I just don't want the salt, I like having friends, so I didn't put this combo in the deck, mostly for budgetary reasons, but also for some social reasons. But that, I believe, is all, ladies and gentlemen. Just let me know how you felt about not only the cards in the deck, but all of my suggestions for the deck, the expensive cards I want to order, the cards that are on the way, all that stuff. But I know that you want to hear Spread Love, Be Kind. You want to hear the Patreon pitch. I know there's 4 of you out there that might, but anyway, there's a lot more to say before we're done, but not actually that much. So let's throw it back to Stand Up Dev to finish things off here. But now, ladies and gentlemen, I must regretfully say that we have reached the end. That is Allski, Kowalski, and Itsky Lewitsky. So make sure you let me know what should come out, what should go in, all that stuff. Am I a good Commander player? You have no way of knowing. Did I build the deck right? I don't know. Let me know down there in the comments section. And also find out in the comments section. I'm sure plenty of people will have plenty of opinions. It's going to be fun. Now, if you like this video, you can like this video. Just seems to make some logical sense, right? There's a through line there, but you can also sub to the channel if you want to see more of my goober butt doing goober butt stuff, I guess. Goober butt stuff. But anyway, you can also, probably the most important thing I should point out here, check out the Patreon. Link in the description. Just $1 a month is all I really ask, and I honestly couldn't continue to do this without the Patreon people. So Strictly Squad, thank you for bringing basically every video to the people that you do. But if you're interested in being part of the squad, you can check out that link down there. Take you right to the Patreon. I'll be like, hey, you want to give this guy $1 a month? He's worth that. It's not going to say that, but like I am worth $1 a month. So, if you want to do it, the link's down there. You can also follow me on Twitch and Twitter and stuff. It's a thing you can do. There's lots of options. I'm a content creator, and I don't have an Instagram or a Facebook. I don't have a TikTok. I haven't really explored all the avenues. So, follow me on the stuff that I do have, I guess is my point. But anyway, that's it. I'm donezo for this one. Just again, let me know how you felt about all the stuff down there in the comments section, and I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.